Many successful professionals who still feel financially unclear are actually highly informed people. They watch finance videos constantly, listen to podcasts, follow investing pages, read books, and yet they still feel financially unclear underneath everything. And this creates a very confusing emotional experience for many professionals because they assume if I just keep learning, eventually everything should finally start making sense. And honestly, at first glance, that sounds perfectly reasonable because financially curious professionals are usually trying very hard to improve. But after years of working with professionals like this, I realized something important. The issue is usually not a lack of information. And this surprises many financially curious people because once financial complexity reaches a certain level, something strange starts happening. The information you learn stops creating clarity. And I think this is where many financially curious professionals begin experiencing what I call financial fragmentation in a completely different form. Not a lack of information, but lack of coordinated execution. So let me show you what I mean. I think there is a very common pattern many professionals eventually experience. I call it the information to execution gap. First, information, then trying to figure out what actually applies to your life. And finally, coordinated implementation, which is where many financially curious professionals get stuck. And this explains why many intelligent professionals can consume enormous amounts of financial content while still feeling financially unclear underneath everything. Because information explains individual decisions, but it doesn't automatically coordinate them. And the difficult part is consuming more financial advice can sometimes create more fragmentation instead of less. So, in this video, I want to explain why smart professionals still feel financially stuck after consuming so much financial content and what layer is usually still missing. As we go through this, I put together a financial fragmentation checklist that can help you assess whether your financial life is becoming structurally fragmented. The link is in the description. Now, a lot of professionals quietly assume that financial clarity naturally improves as information increases. And to some extent, information absolutely helps. Learning matters, education matters, understanding matters. But eventually, something strange starts happening. People become highly informed, financially aware, and intellectually curious, yet still remain inconsistent, fragmented, and operationally unclear underneath everything. And this is where many financially curious professionals quietly become confused because they start asking themselves, if I've already learned this much, why does this still feel unclear? And I think the answer is extremely important because financial knowledge alone does not automatically create coordinated execution. That is a very different problem. Over time, this becomes emotionally exhausting because eventually financial learning starts feeling like motion without resolution. More learning, more videos, more strategies, but not necessarily more clarity. One reason this happens is because financial content usually explains decisions individually, but not how your entire financial life should function together. I mean, one expert says invest aggressively while you're young. Another says protect downside risk. Another says pay off debt first. Another says use leverage. Another says maximize your retirement accounts. And eventually, financially curious people stop feeling informed and start feeling mentally overloaded. And individually, many of these ideas may be useful, but eventually a very important gap appears because financial decisions stop behaving like isolated tasks, don't they? I mean, your cash flow affects your investing, your insurance affects your liquidity, family goals affect your risk tolerance, career changes affect long term planning. Everything starts interacting with everything else. And this is where information alone starts breaking down under complexity because information creates more and more possibilities, but not coordination. And once people become exposed to different strategies, conflicting opinions, endless options, and competing frameworks, something emotional starts happening too. Decision fatigue increases, clarity decreases, execution slows. And this is one of the most important realizations in this entire conversation. More information does not always create more clarity. Sometimes it creates more noise. And that distinction matters enormously because eventually the issue stops being access to information and starts becoming interpretation under complexity. People begin quietly asking questions like, so, which advice actually applies to me? What should I prioritize first? What matters most right now? How do these decisions fit together? And this is where many financially curious professionals realize they were never actually lacking information in the first place. They were lacking coordinated interpretation, the kind that helps increasingly interconnected financial decisions function together coherently. So at this point, I'd really be curious. Do you feel financially underinformed or overinformed but still unclear? Leave it in the comments below. By this point, the issue usually starts becoming clearer. The problem is usually not that people know too little, it's that disconnected information still creates disconnected execution. And many professionals mistake financial learning for financial coordination. But those are not the same thing. If you stopped consuming financial content tomorrow, would your financial system continue functioning clearly, or would things start feeling uncertain again? That question matters much more than many people realize. Now, this next distinction is extremely important. Learning about money can feel incredibly productive. Watching videos feels responsible. Listening to podcasts feels intelligent. Consuming content feels proactive. And honestly, many professionals genuinely are trying hard to improve financially. But eventually, another uncomfortable realization starts appearing. But sometimes you're accumulating financial knowledge faster than financial clarity. Your execution remains unchanged. Your system remains fragmented. Your priorities remain unclear. And this is one of the hidden emotional traps of financially curious professionals. Because advice given without personalization often creates conflict instead of clarity. One source says aggressively invest, but another says stay conservative. Another says prioritize debt. Another says maximize leverage. And eventually, people become mentally overloaded, uncertain, hesitant, and inconsistent because disconnected advice often creates disconnected execution. And this is where another important realization starts becoming unavoidable. Financial decisions are deeply interconnected. Your cash flow affects your investing. Insurance affects your liquidity. Goals affect risk tolerance. Family structure affects planning priorities. And this is why I strongly believe what most professionals eventually need is not endless information, but coordinated interpretation. And this is one of the clearest ways to understand personalized financial guidance emotionally. It's not more content, not more disconnected advice, but coordinated interpretation of that information helping an increasingly interconnected financial life function together coherently. That's a very different thing psychologically. Now, this is where the conversation starts becoming much more personal because general advice cannot fully solve personal complexity. I mean, no two financial lives are actually identical. Different families, different priorities, different fears, different responsibilities, different trade offs, which means eventually general financial advice stops feeling fully sufficient. And this is one of the deepest reasons personalized financial guidance eventually becomes necessary for many high earners. Because eventually, people stop needing disconnected financial answers and start needing coordinated implementation around their actual life. That's a very different thing because real financial clarity starts feeling different emotionally. It starts feeling like you're more intentional or aligned and you're more confident and your movements are more coordinated. It's not about endless optimization or random product accumulation or constant information consumption. No. And this is one of the clearest ways to describe genuine financial clarity. Clarity happens when financial decisions stop competing and start coordinating. And this is why I think many professionals eventually realize something important. The issue was never, am I learning enough? The issue became, how do I make all of this work together clearly? And that is where personalized financial guidance begins making emotional sense for many people. Many intelligent professionals stay financially unclear for years. not because they lack information, but because information alone cannot coordinate a complex financial life. And this is where many financially curious professionals quietly experience an important emotional realization for the first time. Because the issue was never, am I learning enough? The issue became, how do I coordinate all of this clearly under real life conditions? And that's a very different problem. Serious professionals eventually realize that financial clarity is not created by endless learning, it is created by coordinated execution. And that's one of the clearest ways to understand personalized financial guidance. Not more noise, but coordination. Financial content can absolutely help, but eventually, information alone reaches a limit. And many professionals spend years trying to solve a coordination problem with more content consumption alone. But something deeper eventually becomes necessary. Not just more learning or more information, but coordinated guidance, helping financial decisions start working together coherently over time. But even when people finally decide to seek help, another frustration often appears. They want guidance, but they still want clarity and involvement too. I'm Juan Casas from Beacon Wealth Advisory. I'll see you in the next episode.